Hello, everybody. Welcome to this Gastein session. My name is Richard Bergström. I'm actually on site in Gastein. The board members of European Health Forum Gastein decided to come here to make sure the villagers okay. The village is here, and they're ready to meet us all next year when we all can meet in person. Hopefully, I trust. So this session today is sponsored by Roche. Thank you so much. And it's about a topic which is very close to my heart, which is about the use of health data for various purposes. My name is Richard Bergström. As I said, board member of European Health Forum Gastein since many years. Many of you may know me from my time as head of FPA in Brussels, the European Pharma Lobby Association. Right now I'm working with the government, actually, the Swedish government, as vaccine coordinator, and I'm part of the European Commission team to procure vaccines for Europe. So if I drift into pandemics and vaccines later on in my questions, you will understand my slight bias because of my current occupation. Okay, so I'm very happy to welcome today a panel. We will have a session which is divided in two parts. There will be one part which is inspirational. It's about providing the prospects and the opportunities for secondary use of health data. And then there is a data-driven intro to a panel debate later on. And with me today, I have, in the order that they will appear in the program, I have Minna Hendolin from Finland. Those of you that have been active in the health data space and e-health space will know Minna from her activities in HIMSS, not the least during their successful presidency of Finland, where they hosted a very good conference on the topic, and Minna was very active. Minna is also very active in the World Economic Forum work on the data economy. She works for Citra, which is an independent organization, which is a sort of blend of investment fund to invest in innovation and also a think tank. So she will give us an inspirational speech about future-proofing health data economy, as it says in the title. Then we will have panelists for their reflections. We have Nicola Bedlington, old friend of mine and of many of yours as well. Nicola was Secretary General of the European Patient Forum for many years. She's still active, still representing EPF. So it will be very good to have her perspectives on this. Nicola and I work a lot together on various programs, including EUPATI, part of the Innovative Medicines Initiative, to train patient groups to be active in drug development and policy shaping. So Nicola, very happy to have you back. I would have loved to see you here in person, but situations are as they are. Then we will have Millie, who coming from the Open Data Institute, which will be presenting today a very fresh report on what's the state of play with access to health data for secondary users in Europe. So I look forward to hearing you, Millie, talk about that. And then we have Porek Ward from Roche. I should declare I used to work for Roche, but it's a long time ago now, but there's a slight declaration of interest needed there. Porek is head of commercial operations for Roche, but he's worked many years in Roche in drug development, product development, bringing products to the market, and also as a background working for the Irish government with export promotion and trade promotion. So I'm very happy to have you all on the panel today. We will have a chat, which I think is already up and running. I see it to my right here. We also have a Q&A space, which I should have on my iPad to the left here. I hope I can manage this. Otherwise, James here from the Gastein office is in the background to come in and rescue me if I run into any technical difficulties. We are going to have one video showed at one stage, if everything works out. We are going to have two polls where there will be a number of questions that you can fill out. There will be a QR code you can scan, or there's a website you can log in and do that. But I think, after 1 year or more than 1 year in this virtual world, I think we're all used to all these digital tools. So I don't have to give you any more instructions. So let's dive into the program. As I said, we have divided this into two parts. So the first is really an aspirational session introduced by Minna from Finland, from Citra, to give us perspectives on the EU health data opportunity, or if we use EU lingo, we talk about the EU health data space. choose your words, but I think, Minna, you will be quite broad in your presentation, I understand. So I hand over to you, Minna.
Thank you, Richard, for your kind introduction, and good afternoon, everybody. And it's my very great pleasure and honor to be here today in this great event and this really exciting panel. So the richness and the beauty of Europe is its in heterogeneity, and the population over 700 million and consists over 50 independent countries and over 200 spoken languages, and you just cannot imagine that how many number of cultures we have here. The dimensions in geography, climate, and even mindset, combined with the world-class research community, innovative companies, makes our continent a hotspot for creativity, innovation, and great place to live. But every coin has a flip side. This great diversity causes also challenges when we need to find harmonized ways of working together, agree on policies and guidelines. And I think we all can agree that the health sector is not the one of the easiest one in this respect. A read for radical redesign of how we deliver, practice, and think about healthcare is emerging across the world. And the healthcare systems are under great pressure in the face of changing demographics and rising costs. And like we have now realized in this COVID pandemic, that these challenges, they might be very, very difficult and socially complex and even very difficult to even define. And rarely they are responsibility of any one stakeholder or even one nation. At the same time, demands from the citizens, private actors, and public institutions are challenging the shift of care from sick care, reactive sick care, to a preventive and predictive healthcare. Digitization, advanced technologies and therapies, and especially the utilization of data, they are at the center of tackling these challenges and opening up huge potential for new innovations and solutions in healthcare and businesses. And this is why the 2 years ago here in Gastein, the FutureProofing Healthcare initiative that was co-developed by Roche along with a cohort of leading European experts and thought leaders was launched. The index provided much needed input into the discussion around data enabling healthcare systems and highlighted country by country what policies are working, what practices are fine and well, but also that where there is opportunity for improvement. FutureProofing Healthcare Index also showed it very concrete way how much countries still differ in their maturity in digital healthcare and personalized medicine approaches. Thank you. The European Commission has recognized the importance of digitization and the value of data and taken actions to secure European competitiveness and sovereignty in data. Last year, Commission launched the European Data Strategy that aims to create single market around data by enabling easier and secure access and usage of data. Building of the multi-sectoral European health data space is one of the priorities of the Commission in coming years to 2025. The first action of European Strategy for Data was the proposal for Data Governance Act, an overarching perspective of DGA that addresses data held by public sectors is to stimulate data-driven development to foster open data for businesses, innovation, policy making, and research in all sectors. European health data space is one of the thematic sectors of European data strategy, and it is a collection of actions of the coming years to boost the digital transformation and data usage within the health sector and to build the future for better policy, better healthcare for citizens, and better environment for research and innovation. The health data space contributes to the care delivery processes, so the primary use of data for the individual patients and residents, as well as to the secondary use of data on the cohort of population scale. The aim is also to build single market for digital health services and promote the development of ethical and use of AI in health. The health data space enables the data value chain between data holders and data users across a broad and complicated health domain ecosystem. This implies the federated data spaces will exist on the regional, national, and European level. European health data space will be built on three main pillars. The first, a strong system for data governance and rules and guidelines for data exchange, data quality, and strong infrastructure and interoperability. One concrete tool to create the feeds for health sector in the DGA, so the Data Governance Act, and develop the European health data space is the joint action called TEHDAS. The purpose of this TEHDAS joint action is to help member states and the European Commission in developing concepts and guidelines for governance, usage of sharing of health data for secondary purposes, including also perceptions of health data sharing and citizens' perceptions of health data sharing and also economic sustainability. The results of TEHDAS project will provide elements to the European Commission legislative proposals on the European health data space, as well as support the pan-European dialogue that will follow the proposal. TEHDAS is being carried out by 25 European countries and coordinated by Finnish Innovation Fund Sitra. The vision is that in the future, there is secure, easy, and seamless access to the protected health data for the benefit of citizens, researchers, companies, and communities across Europe, regardless where this data is stored. So thank you for your attention. And now over to you, Richard.
Thank you so much, Minna. Thank you so much. And if you weren't familiar with this acronym TEHDAS, now on, keep it in mind. One of the many great projects that we do together in Europe, in this case, a joint action, meaning it's a project driven both by the European Commission with member states together. And it's interesting to see, Minna, how many member states are part of it. Was it 25 out of 27?
Not only member states, there are 25 European countries. Yes, so there's also countries that are not part of EU Commission, part of the member states, like UK, for instance.
Yeah, or maybe even Switzerland, where I live, to declare that actually. Now, there's another very, very interesting project underway, which I have to do a bit of advertising for, which is the European Health Data Network, which is part of the Innovative Medicines Initiative, which is very complementary to what you're doing, Minna. That is really developing a kind of a catalog for what is available where, a mapping of what's available, so that people like you can then seek consensus and agreement on what you can actually use the data for. So thank you very much. Now I'm going to, before we go on, turn into panel discussion with the panelists, but I'd like to let in the audience here because we have a polling question. And I think the purpose of this question is really about taking stock a bit of where are you on why is health data important? I think it's obvious to everybody that health data is important for those that work in healthcare. I mean, if you're a physician seeing your patient, you need to have a health record in front of you, and you need to make some records. If you're a pharmacist, like I am, if you work in a pharmacy, you need to have some records. But there are all these other people that want to have access to data. And sometimes I make the analogy that this is a room. That's why I like the term space. It's a room where lots of people show up and have different needs. And I look forward later on to hear from Porek, from the side of pharma, from Nikolai, the side of patients, their reflections on why are you so interested in data being made available. So I see now the polling has already started. I didn't even have to read out the question, but I'll do that anyhow while you're thinking, what is the most important outcome? So I think you have one choice here only, correct? What is the most important outcome of an interoperable health data space in Europe, okay? So you have, the question about healthcare professional decision-making, but complemented not just with the evidence-based medicine from regulatory approvals and so on, but also from real-world data, real-world evidence. The second one is along the same lines. It's also for healthcare to improve the provision of care to patients in routine care. Then it's more of a policy level decision making, such as the regulatory agencies, the health technology assessment bodies and so on, to enable value-based health decisions for decision makers. And then it's the question about whether also, or maybe that's the most important one, is it actually will enable the development, faster development of medicine and technology at large. Whether the main purpose is to catalyze gains in efficiency in health systems, or whether it's, and the last question here is there's about EU innovation economy, and it's also finally about data mobility for patients. Something that I've always been very interested in, portability of data for patients, holding your own data and moving it around with you. So let's see. Should we wait maybe a few more seconds before we close this one? Yes, so we see here clearly, if you just take 1 and 2 and 3, you see this is a lot about policies. It's a lot about healthcare delivery. It's a lot about improving healthcare. That's what people say. That's a main purpose. But I wouldn't be surprised if many of you, if you were able to choose 2 or 3, that maybe some of the other ones coming further down here would be there. Okay. So I think that's very interesting to take stock of. Okay. Now I'm going to move over to the panel, and I'll turn first to Nicola. We should always start and always finish with the patients, shouldn't we? I know, having worked with you for many years, Nicola, I know that you've been passionate and your organization has been passionate about data, but also with a concern that data can't just be something that it's free for everybody to use, particularly from the private sector. So I'll let you reflect on this, how you view the strategic importance of availability of data. Not only to treat patients, but also to meet all these other secondary demands. Nicola, over to you.
Thank you very much, Richard, and thank you for the very warm welcome. It is a shame not to be in the Valley, but I'm not so far away. I'm actually here in Vienna, as I've been for the last 18 months, so there we go. I think just reflecting on the work that EPF has done over the years, clearly now there's a big emphasis on the European health data space, but looking historically at the very careful reflections we've had with our membership, we've looked and explored at why patients are generally altruistic with regard to sharing their data because of the impact on research, on health systems, in the context of supporting their peers, supporting future generations, of course, but with legitimate concerns in the context of security, privacy, etc. So that's the kind of landscape. And it's clear from the more detailed work we've been doing recently with them, with what they think about the European health data space. And we're talking about 76 umbrella organizations, European disease-specific organizations covering the whole spectrum of disease areas, and indeed national umbrellas from very many of the EU member states. So a big patient's voice. And from their perspective, it's clear for the European health data space to work, or European health data policy to work per se, it will have to be more than simply a large-scale flagship European project, but to really reach the hearts and minds of patients and citizens out there, to really be shaped with them, by them, to be accepted by them, to respond to their specific needs, and ultimately ensure that health data and the digital transformation that we're living through post-COVID will help deliver better care, increase quality of life, and better outcomes for patients, the outcomes that really matter to them. The comprehensive response to the consultation on the European health data space is on the EPF website and is well worth a read. But just to capture the main essence, the key pillars, essentially, the EPF membership believes that the European health data space should be shaped to ensure barrier-free access and control of health data in an easy and transparent way, with the highest possible level of data protection and based on informed consent. ensure patient safety across the spectrum at all levels, deliver harmonisation while keeping in mind the differences between different health systems across Europe, but also within certain countries. Also taking into consideration and tackling the current and potential future inequalities and gaps in health literacy and access to digital health, to tackle the ethical and practical challenges that were alluded to by Mina linked to current and future digital health transformation, foster the transformation of healthcare that really delivers added value for patients and responds to their needs and concerns. And finally, last but not least, concretely and meaningfully involves patients in shaping the health data space at the many different levels that we're discussing. Governance is really key, implementation, but also crucially as we move forward, thinking about monitoring, evaluation and learning so that we can actually all contribute towards a better vision of health data in the future. So it's clear from the patient's perspective, there is a key and unique opportunity for the European health data space to set up a framework that brings clarity, that brings transparency, that reduces the fragmentation, the piecemeal approach that we have and we're living through today, that really addresses this complex panorama of health data sharing, addresses the specificity of health data, ensures security and privacy, but crucially without creating additional burdens, barriers, unnecessary hindrances to the use of data in the public interest. So essentially what we're thinking about is something, a space, a European health data space that actually helps to streamline and navigate health data, and in particular for patients, but also clearly clinicians, researchers, policymakers, and the industry. So we all have skin in the game, if you like, when we're discussing how to move forward collectively at European level, obviously in the Brussels bubble, but more than that, how it can actually reach citizens and patients out there. And here, I think it's really important to mention the importance of trust, building confidence and acceptance in responsible health data sharing. And here, I think EPF has thought about how to achieve that. And that's a rationale behind its leadership, an initiative called, essentially it's called Data Saves Lives, a platform, a multi-stakeholder initiative bringing together many different players to actually make it easier for patients and citizens to understand why responsible data sharing is so important and how it can actually enhance significantly both research and healthcare decision making. And I can see from your body language, Richard, I should shut up now and give the floor back to you.
No, but I'm just so keen to make a comment, Nicola. You know me by now. I wanted to also, we're certainly going to come back to this later in the discussion afterwards. Towards the end here, about this space where different people are congregating. And with different interests. It's a public, it's a private, it's patients, it's citizens, civil society, and there will be some tension. And you remember when we had a session in Brussels years ago, remember how very good conversation, we brought together some tech people, if I use that term, some tech people, they were your membership from across Europe. And everything was going so well in the conversation about what things we could do with health data until someone said the word monetize. You remember? And this was well intended because it was a tech person saying, well, Google makes money on you. Why shouldn't you be able to get 10 cents for people using your Fitbit data? And it spoiled the whole conversation. Remember, Nicola?
Yeah.
How we had to pick it up from the ground afterwards, and say, well, this is not about money. But so it's very, very sensitive, how you approach this.
It is very sensitive, but I think also the work that's gone on, you mentioned UPATI, the European Patient Academy on Therapeutic Innovation. I think some of the work that's gone on in the Innovative Medicines Initiative space with the emphasis on big data for better outcomes, those projects have helped to nurture a different sort of environment where there's more clarity on what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable, and more appropriate grown-up discourse about issues like monetization and ownership.
No. Exactly. So whereas everybody in the tech sector talks about monetization all the time, I mean, we've got these huge companies with making billions and billions on monetizing our data, but in the health space we're still not familiar. We're not comfortable with having that conversation. So we'll come back to that, Nicola, I'm sure, in the conversation. Thank you so much for a great intro to this. Then I will turn over to one of these private sector operators. So Porek from Roche. Why is it that pharma is so interested in data? I think I know, coming from pharma, but what is it? How would you explain why it's so keen for you? Why is it so important for you and your scientific endeavors to get hold of the data? Because I think many people will be very suspicious and think, oh, you're only trying to target people. You're trying to do marketing and create the demand for something, So Porek, please let us know where you're coming from here.
There was a lot in that, Richard. I'm not sure I'll be able to address all of the things you just asked, but I'll have a go at a few of them. The first thing I would say is, you talked about getting hold of the data. I think maybe that's one of the areas that causes a lot of sensitivity, because it's not about, at least for us anyway, it's not about owning data. It's about accessing data and being able to use it primarily for research. So it's also not about marketing, at least again for us. I liked a lot of what Nicola was saying a minute ago, and I won't try and repeat it. But I think the more we can have open and honest conversations about what should be permissible and what shouldn't be, what should be on limits and what should be off limits, the easier all of this is going to become. We're, Roche, and I think many other people probably in the audience do as well. And we're the largest private investor in healthcare research and development in the world. What we're trying to do is essentially to follow the science. And that means getting a better and better understanding of the biological drivers of diseases, so that we can diagnose them earlier, hopefully at some point begin to prevent more and more disease. And then when prevention isn't possible, to get treatments that are more personalized, that are more precise for the specific disease that any individual person has. The thing about it is, the more we develop an understanding of those biological drivers of diseases, the more and more specific the diseases become. And you could imagine a situation in the future where lung cancer, we already know it not to be a single disease, but it could be a collection of pretty rare diseases. So the reason that we need to get hold, and we want to get hold, as you put it, data to be able to use it, is that in order for us to be able to understand what the drivers of disease are and then to develop medicines to treat them, you need to have very large quantities of data. The data needs to be meaningful, and it needs to be at very large scale. At the moment, certainly around Europe, it isn't possible to do that, because even in relatively big countries, you can have quite a small number of people who are suffering from whatever the very specific disease is at any given point in time. So it's only by pooling all of that all of those data from the different sources around the European Union and beyond, that we're going to be able to continue to advance the science and hopefully continue to get better outcomes for more patients. Either by preventing them, by diagnosing them earlier, and then by treating them when needed. As I was looking at the list of questions, I was one of the ones, I'm probably not the only one, who wanted to vote for all of those things that were on that list. I think it depends on which perspective you take at any given point in time. And as a European Union citizen and an occasional patient, the things that are important for me are about data portability, not only between countries, but even between healthcare providers in the same country. Because that's going to make a better difference to my own health and to all of our health, enabling physicians to sift through the very complex science and therefore make better decisions. As a patient, that's really important for me. I would guess from a healthcare administrator point of view, those things would be pretty important as well, because that's the way you would make your healthcare systems, our healthcare systems, more sustainable. And then from the point of view of being a healthcare industry executive, enabling R&D the way I described, faster, quicker, more precise. Those are the kinds of things that pooling data together at scale could enable. So I don't know if I addressed all of the things you answered, but I had to go at a few of them anyway.
No, that was very good. And I think it's interesting, not the least in this pandemic, when I think a big part of the population, they have been mass educated about science and mRNA and all sorts of the technologies. But on TV and so on, when you visualize is always these vials that go on a conveyor belt, because we think about it as and labs, people in white coats and so on. But in fact, isn't it so important that, if you look at the money spent by pharma and by public investment in health, and if you look at the time spent, these are data projects, aren't they? There's a very important part in the lab. I don't want to denigrate that in any way, but you're a data company, aren't you?
Absolutely. I mean, the vial that you see, or the medicine that you take, it's the physical representation of the analysis of data. Yeah, right. That's what it is. It's the data that underpins all of that. And of course, there's a huge amount of work then that goes around into transforming that data into something that is usable, administrable. But yes, underneath it all it's data.
No, but I don't think most people think about it that way. I mean, so many times I had to put on a lab coat just because I'm supposed to talk about pharmaceutical development. Whereas in fact, maybe I should be in front of a computer with some cool visualization of population health or prediction analysis. So now, very interesting. I would like to let Minna back in a little bit to reflect on what you heard from Nicola and Porek, and also maybe leading into the more fact-based taking stock session we're going to have next year as part 2. Are things getting better from your perspective? Are things improving? Let's see what the report says later, but I'd like to ask you anyhow, Minna, to reflect on if things are improving or not. I mean, you just started your joint action just earlier this year, so do you see any improvement?
Yeah, of course I can say that there is improvement all the time, but it could be so that you can't really see any concrete like those vials yet in that terms. But I think the understanding of things and even the vocabulary or words or this kind of semantic interoperability, all these kind of things, because we need this discussion and understanding in all the levels, not only in the commission level, but all the way when we go back to the individuals of us to understand what we are talking about. Surely this COVID-19 pandemic, it has slowed down the resources and efforts that can be been able to put on these things. I would say that, like in Finland, we have a couple of legislative proposals that has been put on the table because the COVID has taken all the resources now in the ministry to help tackle this current situation. But I think there is this will and understanding now to get things forward. And for instance, this legislation concerning the European health data space, it is was originally expected to be launched, or the proposal for that during this end of this year and beginning of next year. So I guess we are almost in that time frame still, but I'm very positive that these things take time, and as we had already seen and we'll see most likely today, more from in his Millie's presentation, that countries are in different level in their readiness and maturity of taking things to the action. So we have to be patient in that sense as well. Maybe that's all for this moment.
Yeah, thank you. No, thank you. No, so I'm glad you will stay on and can be part of the final panel. I mean, it's interesting. I'm going to introduce now Millie Semeta from the Open Data Institute. Really interesting. Check it out. Look at the report. Where I suppose there will be a link now posted, if not sent before. Really interesting, and it proves something that I have been talking about for many years, that we need to learn from each other. We need to learn from other sectors. There's not only a convergence of the science, there's also a convergence of the tools, And I'll tell you a little anecdote. Years ago, when I was involved in Brussels with the Innovative Medicines Initiative, and we were engaging in big data, I remember how my colleague then, Roxandra, who was head of health in DG Research, how she said, I wonder, do we have the capacity in Europe to manage big data? So she went to CERN outside Geneva to ask them about data crunching. Do we have the computer capacity to crunch through all health records in Europe, for instance? And the response was, oh, no problem. You know, we are analyzing like 100 times that all the time when we do look at particle physics and so on. So I think that was quite interesting. There's so much to learn from other sectors and the capacity for, in this case, data crunching. So I think it's very, very interesting to see how the Open Data Institute is really bringing together different parts of society and different sciences and different experiences. But I do understand, Millie, that health is one of your top priorities right now going forward. So I'm very pleased to introduce Millie, who will give a presentation of her report. Actually, we're going to have video first, I believe. The video first, and then over to you, Millie.
The pandemic has shown us the value of bringing together population health data from multiple sources, such as patient health records, biobank and genomics data, insurance claims data, social security health data, and wearable technology data. Secondary use of health data is a powerful tool in developing and improving medicines and diagnostics, personalising the patient journey, reducing health inequalities, supporting innovation, and informing policy making.
Think about, if you're a Minister of Health planning for your country, right, and you've got that data from different sources, then you can start to think, okay, I can predict what the population might need in 6 months' time. Or, if you're thinking as a hospital manager, you might say, well, in that case, I can see that these kinds of treatments are getting the best outcomes. So maybe this other area is where we need investment and so on. So it helps all across the health system.
But efforts to share health data across European countries are currently being frustrated.
Unfortunately, the current access to the health data is very fragmented. The GDPR offers a high protection of personal data and supports the free movement of personal data. However, the way it is implemented has led to fragmentation at national level, which could give an adequate image of the situation at the level of the EU.
Independent research by the Open Data Institute reveals that although there's a long way to go, some European countries are beginning to put frameworks in place to support secondary use of health data.
The lack of consistency in health data standards was a real surprise finding for us. So one of the things that we've done in this project that I hope will be really useful is we've put together, as part of our research, we looked for examples of good practice. So for each of the policy areas, we said, well, what's that country? How is that country approaching it? And if we thought they were doing something really interesting or really imaginative or really solid, then we used it as an example of good practice. Or as one person said, what can we steal with pride?
The ODI has created a tool that scores each European country on the quality of its policies and the speed at which they're being put into practice. The end result? A Europe-wide ranking that shows which nations are ready for secondary use of health data. The ambition is to give health professionals, researchers and policymakers a better understanding of the health data landscape across Europe, so together we can improve the health of future generations. Find the report and tool at theodi.org.
So there you had it. Excellent, great video on top of that, Millie. And great views of London, I suppose that was.
Yes, that was from the ODI's offices in London. And thank you very much for the invitation to be here. It's a real privilege.
No, thank you so much. And over to you, Millie. Looking forward to hear your observations from the report. Thank you.
Yeah, so thanks. So I think that video does a good job of kind of outlining how we approach this report. As I was rewatching it, I was amused at the use of kind of test tubes and vials following that conversation just now. But I would say, Porrick, when you work in data, the image you always get is the kind of, like the Matrix, the teenage kid with the hoodie on sitting in front of their computer screen. So it's really difficult to find the right visualizations to talk about the work that we do and, and why it's important and interesting. So we wanted to look at the policy environment for secondary use of health data in the European region. And I think it's really interesting that Nicola was talking about patient needs, and Porrick, you were talking about what the science can do, but ultimately neither of those will be fulfilled unless the policy allows it to, right? You know, science can only take you so far. The policy environment must allow that science to be put into practice. And again, patient needs might be recognized, but until the policy environment adapts, those needs can't be met. So the policy environment is really crucial for making the best use of data. So earlier in the session, we talked about, the opportunities in terms of optimizing health systems, addressing health inequalities and so on, and improving patient care. But I would also like to flag specific sort of medical use cases where, I think secondary use of health data could have real impact. So the most obvious one is around pandemic response, and that's really been brought to the fore recently, and sort of coordinating, health responses across national borders or in regions. But the long-term challenges and opportunities are around aging populations and around chronic illnesses, and they're important too. And they're going to be there, the before and after pandemics. But an emerging kind of threat that we see to health security is the health impacts of climate change. And again, that's not going to be confined by national borders. So you're going to need a joined up response across national borders and across regions. So this is some of the thinking about sort of, this panel's future-proofing, right? The kind of health data economy. You've got to think ahead about the emerging challenges and getting ready for them and getting that resilience in place. So at the ODI, the way we think about data is, well, we do a lot of work with health data and in the health domain, but we work across sectors and across jurisdictions. So we had to come up with a model for thinking and talking about health that worked in different domains, so it could be health, could be engineering, could be cultural data. It had to work across jurisdictions, so it could be Europe, could be sub-Saharan Africa, and also working across sectors. So it could be industry, it could be civil society, it could be public sector, it could be academia. So we had to come up with a general model. And I think that's where the strength of our, I hope the strength of our contribution to this discussion comes from. So we have this theory of change, and it's kind of like a pendulum, and you think about, the optimum sort of relationship with data is this kind of, the pendulum's right in the middle, and you get the best outcomes for everyone in society. But if the pendulum swings too far in one direction, you get a data hoarding future where people think the data is so valuable that they kind of, want to control it and won't let anyone use it. And then if the pendulum swings the other way, you get a data fearing future, right, where people don't want the data to be used, don't want it to be analyzed. So how do you find the right balance between data hoarding and data fearing to get the best outcomes for everyone in society? And that's going to be different, for different use cases and different contexts. There's not a fixed place for the pendulum, it's going to vary. So we have this manifesto which identifies six areas of any data ecosystem, and we think that they need to be there for that data ecosystem to be open and trustworthy. So these are data infrastructure, capability, so skills and literacy, innovation, equity, which includes privacy and sort of inequalities, ethics, so data rights and so on, transparency, and engagement. So we think that if those 6 elements are there in your data ecosystem, then it's got a good chance of being a trustworthy and trusted data ecosystem. So what we did was we applied our thinking there about, the theory of change in data futures and, the elements of a trusted data ecosystem. And we applied that to the policy frameworks for secondary use of health data in Europe. So as we said in that video, so we thought about, well, if you wanted a set of policies for secondary use of health data in Europe or in this country in Europe, in line with the ODI's theory of change and manifesto, what would those policies look like? And we came up with a list of 22. So there's about 13 for infrastructure, 2 for ethics, so 13 across those 6 areas. And then we scored them. We scored them first by the quality of the policy, like how much does this align with what the ODI would consider to be, an expression of, our manifesto. And then we scored it for the scale of the implementation, the speed or the scale of implementation. And that gives you a wonderful XY axis, where you've got quality on one side, speed on the other. And then you can see, well, like, have we got lots of really great policies that are being very slowly implemented? have we got lots of, not so great policies that are being rolled out very quickly? It's a different challenge. Have we got not very good policies, but at least they're not being rolled out quickly? I mean, I'm an optimist, so I would see that as an opportunity. Or, the best outcome of all, you've got great policies and they're being implemented quickly. So that allowed us to build this picture of what's happening both at a national level in European countries, but also across the region. So yeah, so we've got these rankings, and Richard, just before the call, you were saying that it was a bit harassing to have rankings. It's kind of tongue in cheek, right? Like these aren't things you can quantify exactly. It's just to start a conversation. So we've managed to kind of just score all these dimensions and look at where countries fall, group them also by category. So clusters of who's doing well as a category, and who's doing not so well, looking at who's doing well in specific areas, for example, who's doing well in ethics, and so on. So with the report, we've also done country profiles, which include things like the GDP, the population, GDP per capita, but also Gini coefficient for in-country health inequality, so you get a more rounded picture of the environment in which these policies are being implemented or developed. And best of all, my favorite part is we've also created a digital interactive tool which you can access online, and that allows you to kind of search, filter, and explore the data yourself. You can also download our scorecards and sort of tinker with the data to see what different outcomes you could get if a score improved in a certain area, which we hope will be useful for country policymakers. I'll stop there. There's so much more I could say, but I really want to kind of open it up to discussion and hear your feedback.
No, fantastic, excellent. So thank you so much, Millie. And in fact, what I particularly appreciate is also the dimension about the quality of the data, or call it completeness of the data, because I know that so many of my colleagues in research, they've been looking forward to receiving large data sets or accessing or seeing large data sets, and then it turns out that half empty. You have fields in the health records that are empty or not standardized. So therefore they're not useful. So you can have all the best policies in the world and all the most favorable data sharing policies in place, but if the quality of the data is not there, hence the importance also to work on mapping the data and standardizing the data. So thank you so much. I think that was a great cue into a reflection now on these facts that you presented now. So the panelists here did get the report beforehand, right? So I will ask Nicola and Porek and Minna to reflect on this. In particular, I'll ask you two questions, if you can keep it short though. One is to reflect on, what do you take out of this when we reflect on the role of the European Union, European Commission, above country collaborations vis-a-vis in-country health systems, okay? What is it you take out of this? That can take us forward for future projects. And the other one is really, a report like this one with its challenges with mapping and ranking and so on. What do you see are the strengths and the weaknesses of this report, and what debate might it cause? Nicola, do you want to start?
Sure, Richard, and congratulations to Millie for obviously a big piece of work, but also the great presentation, really clear about the direction of travel of the report and its potential. And it also echoes previous work, the FutureProofing Healthcare Index, and this idea of good practice sharing across Europe where it can be replicated, taken to scale. The country scorecards obviously highlighted the leadership and vision in the context of health data policy, secondary use of health data, but in reality, and I know you've mentioned the inequality dimension, but in reality, broadly speaking, it's actually reflecting the health inequalities map across Europe. And I think we need to address that with new opportunities. Clearly, data is going to be one of the cornerstones of building back better. And I think that we should really be reflecting on the recovery and resilience facility and the national plans developed by all of the member states, and see where health data actually fits in there, because I think this is an important piece that could actually contribute towards some of those countries scoring a little bit better further down the line. I also think at European level, apart from all of the policy stuff going on with the European health data space, there are some really exciting new funding and collaboration opportunities. We've mentioned the Innovative Medicines Initiative, and the successor to the Innovative Medicines Initiative is the Innovative Health Initiative, which is looking at innovation beyond medicines, looking at digitalization, innovation in that space, in the data space, in the technology space, but crucially in the area of social innovation. And I think that looking at this through a data lens, these huge public-private partnerships with patients engaged right from the onset, I think may also support some of the countries that are perhaps lagging behind and need a little bit more encouragement. You mentioned in the report the GDPR and how the lack of, let's say, consistency and harmonization interpretation of GDPR at national level is stymieing some of the creativity and some of the smart policy decisions. And I think that's another area that needs to be tackled both by the member states and indeed at Commission level. So those are a few thoughts. I think, again, patient engagement in the governance across the spectrum. You talked about some of the areas of patient and citizen involvement, and these are really key, but they're quite, in a way, soft policy. And I think in order to get it right for patients and citizens, they need to be at the heart of the thinking and the governance as well. I think trust and trust between healthcare providers, business and government, and trust between patients, citizens and those stakeholders is really key. And this is, again, is why initiatives like Data Saves Lives is actually highly complementary with the work that's been presented today. I'll stop there to listen to other colleagues on their perspectives, but congratulations.
Thank you. Richard, would you like me to respond to Nicola straight away, or would you like to take comments from other panelists first?
No, please do. I want to say one thing. As being the chair of the meeting, I have the power to say something. So I just want to say, based on what Nicola mentioned, the GDPR term, which is prominent in your report. My belief is that very often these legal concerns are used as an excuse not to share data when there's actually, because it's a lack of trust. So I think you're absolutely right, Nicola, and you're repeating this all the time about you need to build the trust between the stakeholders, because there's always an excuse, or they're not interoperable, or it's too expensive, or it's unethical, or it's GDPR. It's always something, right? Now, Millie, over to you.
Brilliant, thank you. Nicola, I thought your comments were really rich, so I may not be able to pick up on all of them, or maybe I can just give some pointers now and we'll see if we can return to them in the discussion. You're right that, to some extent, the country kind of performance was, it correlated to health inequalities across Europe, you're right. But there were some interesting variations. So for example, what I like about our library of good practice is that every country will have done something well that others can learn from. So Lithuania is not an affluent country, but they're doing really well on ethics. And that's something that all the other countries in the region can learn from. Conversely, you have a country like Germany, which is really quite affluent, and yet it hasn't been scoring so well on infrastructure, and also kind of lost a few points for industry exclusion. So it's not an automatic, that the kind of wealthier countries are scoring the best. And I think that's really valuable. On your point that trust is really key, so at the ODI we've got a program in data assurance, which is trust in data and data practices, and our research so far has shown that the conditions for trust are not static. They're not the same in every use case. They're not the same in every community, right? And what that means is every country, every stakeholder group has an opportunity to innovate and create the conditions for trust for those particular use cases. And it's not going to be one size fits all across Europe. So there are opportunities for leadership right there that are cost effective and that don't need a big capital outlay, right? It's about, kind of exactly that, community engagement and so on. under the engagement part of our manifesto, we included both, patient and public engagement, but also data institutions, which is the broader category that the European Data Governance Act calls data intermediaries. So data intermediaries under the European Data Governance Act are for, data sharing. But the ODI, we take a step back and we look at the whole activities around data stewarding, so data collecting, data governance, and so on. And it's, again, thinking what can community organizations, what's their role in this, in terms of maybe collecting data, stewarding it, granting access to it. And finally, I would just say that we have a view around data governance that goes a bit beyond data protection and controlling access to data. So a broader way, perhaps, of thinking about data governance is having an obligation to get the best outcome from that data. And that tips the balance away just from control and protection for the sake of that as a reflex, which is a data fearing future where the data is not used, to thinking, how do we make sure this data is used in the best possible way? And that takes you towards that kind of outcome that we want to get to. So it's a different interpretation of data governance that we hope will find that balance between privacy and innovation, and so on. But I'll stop there because I know we could have so much more to talk about.
No, thank you so much. And it reminds me of this reflection that many of us have made, the fact that on data assurance and on consent, that it probably shouldn't be static. It shouldn't be like it's now and forever, because your perspectives as a citizen may very well change. You may have relatives or yourself that suddenly suffer from a disease, or you get some insights, and you realize, well, maybe my data can help research. So that is why you need to build, in the perfect world, you have some kind of dynamic consent system, which we don't have. The idea is not new, but I know you touch upon this in your report. So excellent. I'd like Porek to come in as well, to reflect on this, and thank you for sponsoring this very good policy research, Porek. Grateful, we're all grateful.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you as well for doing all this great work and for the excellent presentation you made. I was making some notes as we were going through. I won't repeat the things that Nicola said, and I agree with every single one of them. Coming from a company, like we were saying before, which is based on data, then sort of my and our natural bias is that it's always better to have data than not have data, and I think this report contributes to that. It adds to a base of things that have been done before, and I think it builds on it in a really nice way. What I hope happens to it, what I hope doesn't happen to it, is that it becomes a basis for rivalry of policymakers or others in countries looking at each other and wanting to compete. I think, as Millie said a minute ago, there's a great opportunity here to have a conversation, to start a conversation about what are the things that are going well in some places, what are the things that are going less well in others, and then try and figure out how together, as a group of countries in Europe, we can bring ourselves all up to the same level on all of the things. That might be some kind of utopia, I don't know, but I do think it's worthwhile pursuing. And again, I really do hope that this piece of work contributes to that discussion, and allows us to move forward together. As I said before, I think it's important today, for the organization of healthcare systems today, for the organization of patient care today, and it's really important for tomorrow, because the more sophisticated our understanding becomes of disease, the more we can do to keep people healthy, and the better we can do in keeping people alive and well for longer when they become ill. But in order to do it, we're going to need a vast amount of data, all very well curated, interoperable, easy to use, and then of course treated with the kind of treated as sensitive as it is, and used appropriately.
Well said, Porek. Very good. I'm going to let Minna come in as well. I'm going to give you a question, though. I'm looking here at the Q&A chat here. So there's a specific question for you, and it ties in nicely to what we have heard from Millie, touching upon ethics. So this is a specific question for you, Minna, here. Is, as we're moving towards a European shared European data space, what types of ethical issues need to be considered? I'm sure you can give a very long lecture on that, but top of mind, particularly in view of the report from the Institute, what would you say?
Oh, this is a very tricky question, and the ethics is very important part of the whole whole space, and I would say that in the ethics side, what comes to my mind, the kind of saying is that data is for giving, not taken. So if we think about this as a starting point, that we are every individual and citizens, it's our data, and we should be able to understand where it is used and who is it using, and also the what does it really mean for me. And this is really a very wide kind of question and open still. But I think that in the next step, when we have been, for instance, now went through this very kind of, in the European health data space, this interoperability part and infrastructure and those kind of things, we do have one of the whole package of citizens' perspective and individuals' kind of perceptions of the data. And that context is definitely important to discuss on the ethics as well. And as we have seen that the data as such is not a kind of desert island of itself. For instance, this summer, European Commission launched its AI strategy, and all these things are kind of linked together. So you have to see the holistic picture of ethics and in terms of health policies and the whole data policy in Europe. But maybe that was not so precise answer.
No. It was.
But what I wanted to just maybe say in terms of your previous question, and first, I was so thrilled to read this Millis and Odie's report, because it was so much very in line with the FutureProofing Healthcare, the European index we did 1.5 years ago. And I had a privilege to be involved in that. And already at that time, we were really thinking that what are the lessons learned or call for actions after the FutureProofing Healthcare Index. And I think it's just we are in the same situation now, and I think the most important what I can feel in what to take forward is that to understand that every country is really different, and when your question was that what can be argued or what might raise up some discussion is that what is good enough, so that where the country want to put, how high the bar will be lifted in their strategy of vision, where they want to accomplish, and that should really go into that level. And then when we are building this European health data space, that what is good enough, so that we can really have the access to the data from each of the country, so that it is kind of a docking of the, there's a space shift, and then you dock their other or a vehicle there in the space, so that it is possible to get this data flow and things smoothly from each of the country. So that is something that I think we need to really think about and understand that it's not enough that we are building things on the European level, the Commission level, and these policies, but it have to really go to each of the country, and even in the country, in the regional level, how things will be, but what kind of roadmap they will be, and how we can learn from each other. I think Millie nicely already lifted up that we really need to learn from each other, and how we can use the funding. For instance, there is a lot of EU funding now available. Countries have their recovery and resilience funding. Can those be now used for promoting the readiness for digitalization and data usage? So maybe those were the kind of first reflections of the report, and I'm sure that when we really have more time to go deep into those, and they will be definitely used in our policy work as well, these country reports now, and to understand, and that is very important.
Yeah. So one observation from my side, and it's I guess a question both to you, Minna, and also to Millie maybe, is, I mean, Minna, you have the experience from before, both from you work with the World Economic Forum and in HIMSS, not the least, with the benchmarking, and you mentioned in the index just a second ago. Okay, so you have the experience with that. I mean, I suppose these are quite powerful tools to visualize how countries behave, or some behave better than others, but it's also somewhat provocative at times, But what is your general experience with these types of of indexes, and particularly when you make them so graphically clear as in this report. You have any reflection on that? I mean, will it backfire? Is it helpful? You know, nudging people?
Yeah, I think that what already this Audis report showed, and it was also the FutureProofing Healthcare report 1.5 years ago, said no country is perfect. Everybody needs to improve, and it's never ready. You have to, it is continuous development. You have to understand where the world is going and understand your own strength and weaknesses in each of the country and how it is linked to the European development, and not restricting not only in Europe, but there's a world around beyond Europe as well, so that we understand that. So it might of course cause some positive kicks in some of the countries, of course, and some that we are doing well, but also I think every country need to use it for self-reflection also, and understand that there are really areas to improve, and how we can collaborate with others, and how we can really improve together so that we have better future for each of us.
So positive kick, we take on that language. I think that's the way to see it, and not, you know, closing up and feeling criticized. But a question to you, Millie, when you did this report, I mean, reflecting the fact that some of our countries are pretty devolved in terms of healthcare, autonomous regions, we have different data holders and so on. I take the country I know best, Sweden. You know, I know some of the patient registry holders are extremely willing to participate in transnational research and share with the private sector and so on, and others are less. And you also see within, take Germany, for instance, you know, our biggest economy, where you have some of these registries, for instance, now the mandatory cancer registries, some are open for business with the private sector, and others are not, you know. How do you view that? Isn't that there a risk here when we sort of do country by country, that we lose the different flavors in each of the countries?
So I think that's a really great question. Thank you. And before I answer, I just want to say to Mina, thank you very much for saying that that you plan to use our report in your policy work. That's a fantastic outcome. But so Richard, to your point, I think that speaks to Mina's kind of, you know, discussion about how to use something like, you know, country rankings and so on, and also Porrick, to your point about, you know, well, you know, the scoring shouldn't be a basis for rivalry. So yeah, so data's never complete, right? It's never the full picture. So the advantage of having country by country analysis is it points out what can be influenced at a country level by the country stakeholders. And the report has, you know, a kind of a list of about, I think, 8 or 9 different stakeholder groups, right? Including, for example, competition regulators, information regulators, and so on. So in order to make progress in this very complex policy space, I mean, European health data policy space is the intersection of health policy and data policy, right, which are both highly complex and also highly technical. So by delineating what's happening at a country level versus what's happening at a kind of regional or European Commission level, that helps stakeholders identify their agency for influence, which is really important for empowerment and mobilizing your resources in the best possible way. I'm thinking here particularly of, say, patient groups, you know, or civil society organizations. So there's that aspect to it. I also think that, as we've said, the solutions need to be context sensitive. They need to be appropriate for that culture and for that community. And again, that's something that I think should happen at a country level, or maybe even, you know, subnational, federal and regional. So that's worth considering too. To speak to Porrick's comment about, you know, figuring out how to work together, in the context of health security, we are only as safe as our most vulnerable members. And I think for me, in terms of thinking about, you know, kind of you know, things like the kind of, you know, the tongue-in-cheek country league and so on, it's not about kind of racing higher and higher up the league table. It's also making sure those at the kind of more vulnerable end of that table are protected too, right? And we've seen this most clearly in the context of the pandemic. We are only as safe collectively as our most vulnerable members, right? So I think that's a really important point, and that's worth thinking about in terms of the European vision as a whole, I would say. In terms of what the data or the data analysis does or doesn't enable, I mean, there's two key measures, I think, which are not captured in this report. One is the actual impact or effectiveness of the policies. So we've given a score for the quality of a policy, and we've given a score for how much investment is being made into, you know, rolling it out, into implementing it. But we haven't measured how it's landed, how it's been received by the population, you know, what impact it's had, whether it's been effective. That would be a very different kind of study. That would be kind of, you know, empirical sort of socioeconomic study. So that's not in scope for this piece of analysis. But I think that's really important, because a policy could score quite well in terms of being high quality and lots of investment being put into rolling it out in a country. But that doesn't mean it's had public acceptance. That doesn't mean it's being well received, say, by healthcare professionals and so on. And I'm sure we've all had experience of, you know, major government investments that had to be quietly abandoned because they didn't have, you know, public buy-in, or they didn't have industry buy-in. So that's worth considering. The other area which is not measured in this report, which is also really key, is we have these 22 policy indicators, and they're distributed by the ODI's 6 manifesto areas, but they're not distributed equally. So infrastructure, as I mentioned, has 13 different kinds of policies in it, but ethics only has 2. So what that means is countries that are doing really well on infrastructure tended to score higher overall, because the total scores were kind of skewed that way a bit. Now, we considered kind of applying a weighting in order to make sure that every manifesto area had a, you know, equal significance. But that also distorts things in a different direction, because if you've only got 2 indicators for, I think we've only got 1 indicator for capability, then your 1 capability score would skew the rest of, you know, all the other kind of investments you're making, say, in innovation and so on. So in the end, we just did it on a 1-to-1 ratio, with the result that, you know, that there is this imbalance. I would also say that sometimes policy isn't the right tool. So we have 13 different policy indicators for infrastructure. Does that mean we should have 13 policy indicators for ethics? I mean, I'll put it to you, if you had to deal with 13 different codes of ethics, would that speed up research or slow it down? You know, I think it's better to have, you know, sort of 1 or 2 comprehensive, you know, codes of ethics that were trusted and robust and that everyone understood. So the solution isn't necessarily to have, you know, equal numbers of policies under each heading. So there's room to kind of interpret, reinterpret, offer different frameworks and so on. As you said, it's about starting a conversation and keeping that conversation going in a collaborative way.
Yes, and you know, in that spirit, let's bring in the audience here with a second polling question that we designed together, all the panelists and speakers. Okay, so we have a question number 2 coming right now. So let's see now if during this conversation, we heard you in the beginning what you thought were important for data sharing, and now let's look now at what it should be prioritized. And let's see. Maybe in a way, we're checking whether you have moved during the meeting. They're not the same questions, but it's going to be interesting. So is it to optimize health systems, improve the patient journey, encourage patient-public participation, or expand innovation? Or call it speed up, you know, the advancement of science for the benefit of patients with new technologies. Maybe I was trying to nudge you in that direction, because I think the last one there is a very important one. But it's interesting, my take a little bit on this overall, both the first question round and this one, is that I think that also reflecting on the audience of Gastein, the followers of Gastein, and also, you know, how we need to argue about this. It's clear that, you know, it's the health system's performance and patient care which has to be the main argument for any sharing of data. I see Millie, you're nodding, you know. I know Porek, you and I and others would love to tap into more data to advance science. And I think there's recognition of that. But I think, you know, based on just on this poll here, I don't know how many people have answered in total. Can we see that number here? Do we know? 30. Oh, it's only 30 people that have responded. Okay, maybe you're shy. So we got something to work on here, I think. Now I have a couple of questions from in the Q&A chat here that I'd like to pose to the panel. And one is interesting. It says, you know, is that already, you know, what experience do we have with data sharing in this sector or other sectors? Do we have any examples of data sharing? I guess the way to interpret the question is it's not data sharing in the forms of publications, because for instance, in my area now of vaccinations, we see fantastic data, real world data coming from Israel and the UK and so on that we can learn from, moving, for instance, to a third dose to boost the vaccine effectiveness. Things like that we pick up through regular publications. So I suppose here we're talking more about actually sharing raw data, or lots of data, chunks of data. And I suppose, Porek, the best example of that are your clinical trials, aren't they? Multi-center international clinical trials where you collect data, you clean the data, and you put it together. That's an obvious example. But any other good examples from the recent past where we've seen big-time data sharing?
I must admit, Richard, that's really the only large-scale data sharing effort that I can think of in healthcare. I mean, beyond the randomized clinical trial, there's also a collection of real-world data. So there's more and more collection of real-world data in the context of trials. So I guess those would be the ones that would immediately spring to mind for me.
Of course, we have cross-border healthcare where we keep electronic health records, but that's by individual and not as cohorts, right?
Yeah. And then there are also some countries where you can actually have access to electronic prescriptions. Like if I go to Estonia, for instance, that I can go to the pharmacy and they have access to my e-prescriptions. But there are only a few countries like they're sharing the clinical data, the healthcare data as well. So as I also saw the question on the poll, the question and answers section was that the question was that is there a good platform for sharing the data? And I think the question is that no, there's not a good platform for sharing the data in Europe yet, only for some research purposes. And that's why we are on the journey now.
Well, and there's also, and as some of you know, I have been prior to now working on vaccines 24/7. I've been involved in this area and also looking at what can we learn from the tech side. What is it from crypto? What is it from differential privacy? What is it that we can learn from other sectors where we can actually put some additional faith or trust in the use of the data? I met one of the biobank holders in Europe, in Northern Europe, saying that we would in principle like to share our wealth of information on our population, the whole region, share that with the researchers globally, including the pharma industry. But we'd like to have some assurance. What do they do with the data? Can we somehow can we have someone spying, or can we have some control of what you do with the data? If we give, for instance, Roche, you have a project in, let's say, RA or immunology or virology or cancer, okay? And you get access to data for a specific purpose. Is there a way that you can assure these biobank holders and their bosses, the politicians and the media, that actually you will only do that and not use the data for something else? I'm a naive believer in technology. I think there must be some tech gadget that you can use to keep an eye on how the data is used. I don't know, Porek, you must be thinking about this. You probably have a whole department thinking of blockchain and crypto, don't you?
We have lots of people thinking about lots of things. I'm not a tech expert. I would guess there may be some ways of doing what you just described. In the end, this is always going to come back to what we were talking about before, which is a question of trust. In other words, if somebody is going to provide, you talked about clinical trials. So we have been doing for many years clinical trials. And we treat the data that we generate from clinical trials with great care and sensitivity. And we're proud of the track record that we have in making sure that it remains confidential and that it's only used for the purposes for which it was provided. I guess there can be safeguards in the system. I see Nicola has a hand up, so you may have thoughts on this or experience or knowledge that I don't have. But I do think the fundamental question is this: who is it being provided to? What are they going to use it for? And then over time, can we be assured that whoever's using it is only using it for the purpose for which it was designed? I think that there's many things that the healthcare industry and the pharmaceutical industry can be justly criticized for, but I do think that as an industry, not just as Roche, we have been good at that over the years.
someone said trust but verify, right? So I think that's what I'm after. Is there some tech that you can apply to give that extra assurance? Nicola, you have your hand raised.
Just super quickly, because I know we're running out of time. I think one project that's interesting to look at is the AIDEN project, the European Health Data and Evidence Network, and they're looking at a federated system of data sharing where the data actually stays in its own location and is somehow moved into the big data space, analyzed with all of the safety nets that you've alluded to. And I think this is I've explained it in a very layperson's term, but I think that is definitely an area that there'll be a lot to learn from. There's also global initiatives like RareX that's looking at data sharing globally for the rare diseases community, and the value of that, I think, is self-explanatory.
Yeah. No, I'm also a lay person, Nicola, as you know, but I've also heard this analogy with it's like a train that travels around in the various data sets. And I know, we all know that our phone operators, you know, I have an iPhone, they know a lot about me, these guys. But somehow they manage to, you know, keep it safe, but they learn so much about me, you know, male, 55-year-old, they're coming from Sweden, living in Switzerland, they probably know that as well. And they can somehow learn from that and extract that without revealing my identity, you know. So there's a lot we can learn from other sectors. Not that I'm all happy about what's been going on, but certainly I think putting those tools to use for something that really matters to us all, which is our health, I think would be much better received.
Richard, if I might just come back to you on one thing, I think we need to get away from the idea that in order for data to be used, it somehow has to be taken from wherever it is and moved to somewhere else.
Yes.
And that isn't, of course, the case.
No.
The question is, you know, one of the safeguards that can be put in place is to say, yes, you can have access to these data for this purpose, and that's the data are going to stay where they are, and you can have access to that, and we control that access to it. That's another way, probably one of the better ways of safeguarding it.
No, and I think, Porek, we have to differentiate this between when sometimes you really need big data, you need huge data for drug discovery, for instance, where you really need to get hold of all the information you have about a human being, including sequencing, you know, epigenetics, everything you can learn. But those are very discrete projects. In most of the cases, you have simple questions. I mean, think about our safety question. Take vaccines effectiveness. What if we can somehow just get the information about how long time does it take from your second dose until you show up with another infection, a breakthrough infection? I don't need to get the data. I don't need to get any personal information. I just need to see this data somehow. So I think that's what I'm after. And Nicola also with her, you know, the analogy with the train, you know, it doesn't have to be that you send the data. It could be that you somehow see it. So I think there's a lot we can do here, and all policy work and creative solutions start somehow with taking stock of the facts. And I think this is really a purpose of this meeting here now, was to see the ODI report, reflect on that in view of people's aspirations, different stakeholders' aspirations. So I'd like to draw this to a close now. We have a few minutes left. I'd like to, I will let you, Nicola, you should have a last word as always. Or maybe I will as a moderator, but I will let you in a few minutes. But I would like to have Minna, Millie, and Porek, and then Nicola say a few opening remarks in the last few minutes we have left of this session. Minna, do you want to start?
Yes, I'd love to start, and I think we have already said so many great things and have already said, and I think we all agree that definitely there is a lot of diversity now in European countries, in their maturity and readiness to develop and implement these trusted and trustworthy secondary health data ecosystems. And as I said, that no country is perfect. But however, it seems that there is a considerable appetite for EU-level support to address these needs for better technical infrastructure, technical and semantic interoperability, data quality and acquisition, like Bedrock just said, digital skills and capacity building. And but each country just need to understand their own strengths and weaknesses and build their own roadmap in line with the European health data space. And in the end, and it is all about people, as we have already discussed, and I think Nicola very nicely have lifted up the importance of individuals. And people's role will increase in the future, not only as an end users or consumers or passive data source, but also as an ecosystem partner for co-creation. So as I said already before, the data is for giving, it's not taken. And we need to show the benefit and not break the trust. That's my closing words.
Thank you, Minna. Thank you so much. Then I'll ask Millie to reflect.
Brilliant, thank you. So Mina, I'd like to pick up on your comments there, that no country is perfect. And I'd go further actually and say that our analysis showed that most countries in Europe are doing really well. They're really well positioned to make the most of the secondary use of health data. So there's a really strong foundation to build on. I also liked your point there about co-creation, so the secondary use of health data, it depends on data flows across sectors and across borders. Progress can't be achieved alone by just one or two communities or stakeholder groups or by just one or two countries. So we hope that people will use the report and the digital tool, which is fantastic, really have a look at it. We hope that you'll use these resources to, as you say, understand the strengths and weaknesses, but also understand from that what agency you have to influence getting a really good outcome and who you need to work with and who's available to work with to get that outcome together. So over the next few months, ODI will be looking at ways to work with Roche and with others to support development of the European health data ecosystem. Maybe we might be back this time next year to provide an update, but either way, please stay in touch and let us know if you'd like to know more or to get involved or to collaborate on work in this area. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you, Millie. Then I will let Porek come in. And I have, by the way, I have an idea for you. So next time I'm at Zurich airport and you see these huge posters and it says Roche, and it says personalized medicines or something, you should Roche the data company. That's my idea.
I'll feed that into the suggestion box, Richard.
Porek, over to you.
I haven't been in an airport for nearly 2 years, though. I would say this just before I came into this session, I was in a different meeting where we were, of all things, talking about healthcare system innovation in East and Southeast Asia. And as many of you probably know, there's an awful lot of really interesting experimentation going on in those countries, in those systems. Never mind all of the things that are happening in China and in the US. So in Europe, we're not in the lead in this. And yet, somehow or other, I must admit, I feel really optimistic about what the future of healthcare could look like in Europe, because we now have a political and policy momentum towards creating something that doesn't exist anywhere else and probably couldn't exist anywhere else. However imperfect they may be, there are more similarities, I think, in the healthcare systems across Europe than there are differences. And in general, they are really high quality systems. We have fantastic life science universities in Europe. And we have lots of people, lots of bright people who have energy and appetite for making a big difference to them. And I think if we are able to continue this momentum, if we're able to get over the fears and the worries about sharing of data, by acknowledging the sensitivity of healthcare data, acknowledging that there are some risks in it, but also speaking positively about the differences that we could make if we all work together, differences to healthcare system sustainability, differences, yes, to the strengthening the industrial base in healthcare in Europe, and also for making, most importantly, big differences in the health and the outcomes for the citizens and the patients of the European Union. I think over the next 5 to 10 years, we could make an enormous leap forward. So I actually feel really optimistic, and I hope we can all work together to make it happen.
Yeah, there are causes for optimism if you're a European, because single payer systems, national health services, they do have their advantages because we are sort of locked in. We are in a health system. Now, final word then, Nicola.
Thanks, and perhaps Podrick should have had the final word because it was so optimistic and forward-looking, but I think I'll reiterate a couple of the messages that I've been saying throughout the afternoon. Millie, you talked about agency. Again, I'd just like to stress how important it is for patients and citizens to really be involved in a meaningful and effective way in the governance of health data. This is absolutely crucial. I've talked about trust, confidence and acceptance. This is again really key. And digital health literacy is also really important, not only for patients, but healthcare professionals are embracing massive change, huge cultural shifts, and they also need to look at their health data literacy, digital health literacy as well, again with the spirit of collaboration. And digital health literate systems is another key area, finding a mechanism to actually bring together person-centered healthcare and value-based healthcare to look at the outcomes, the goals that matter to patients, the outcomes that matter to patients, and how we can measure those effectively using data that will lead to quality improvement across the spectrum. I think that is another really interesting area. And my last point is meaningful patient involvement in health systems, services, design and strengthening. Data is absolutely critical here. It is the glue that can help us all think about predictability, to think about preparedness, to think about investment, but also disinvestment. And again, the patient's voice is important here, alongside, of course, the data dimension. Thanks, Richard.
No, thank you, Nicola. Thank you so much. And thank you to all the participants, panelists. Thank you to Roche for sponsoring this session, for the ODI Institute for preparing a good report. Now, please tell all your colleagues and friends about this session. It's available online. You can download the ODI report. And don't forget, next year we will meet in Gastein again. Thank you all.